Howdy. This is Art 102. This is week 3, week 4. I forget which one. Week 4. And today is March 24th, 2023. Yeah. Before I started, I just want to show off my daughter's skin. She just shed today. And yeah, she's pretty long. Um, yeah. All the context saying I want to show my daughter's skin sounds kind of weird, but yeah. All right, gonna share screen. Okay, so today's topic is media and materials. So we're going over the specificity of how to make art, as we talked about in week 2. Media as a way to transmit an idea. So we're talking about how artists transmit ideas. Okay, first one is drawing, which shouldn't surprise anyone. Uh, it's recognized as an immediate form of expression, and it's the simplest, easiest way to do things. Basically, um, it's at the forefront of art because everyone can do it. It's accessible. You can do it with so many different things. As this image here shows you, this is Robert Rauschenberg's automobile tire print. Um, it's kind of self-explanatory what that is, using a sort of ink or charcoal or some other substance to draw with a tire. Um, and why wouldn't it be a drawing, right? You're just using a different method than a pencil or brush or whatever. Yeah, so the drawing concerns, things we think about and consider when talking about drawing is line, which we talked about in detail previously, the surface of the substrate or matrix or canvas. Substrate basically, or matrix or canvas just means what we're drawing onto. Value, which is darkness or lightness, which we already covered, and color as well. Okay. So we discovered, well, we not the royal we discovered cave paintings from a couple years back, I would say. Um, and yeah, these are the first earliest known official art. Um, the reason we don't know this is the official art because there's plenty of things that have probably existed before, but they're destroyed or we can't see them anymore for some reason. Basically, we're able to still see these, so they're able to last a long time. Okay. Um, and yeah, just cave drawings. These aren't necessarily have a specific function necessarily. I mean, other than ritual or whatever, it's recording art in a sense, recording the world around them through art. Uh, and there's plenty of documentaries about this, but this is one that's highly recommended by Werner Herzog. I haven't personally seen it, but what's pretty interesting is that uh, you'll notice that like there's a lot of like overlapping shapes or whatever. A theory is basically that flickering from flames creates a sort of animation where you see like one of the heads or bodies at one time, different times. Words are hard today. So yeah, the flickering of a light will create a sort of animation, which is pretty cool. Illusions. So we talked about perspective, adding a third dimension into a two-dimensional thing. When we're talking about drawing, it's two-dimensional because we're using a piece of paper. Um, we're not counting VR art right now. But yeah, so modeling is a way to create that sense of illusion without like perspective lines or without the necessity of perspective lines. So yeah, using shadow by using cross hatching, which we talked about before, or just shading, which is a lot more common. Those are ways to make our images kind of pop out at us. So yeah, we use value, again, using neutral values for midtones, white values for the brightest tones, and cross hatching or just shading for the darkest tones, right? It mimics the real world as far as light and shadow and how we perceive things um, as fully dimensional without, even though our eyes are just these flat screens, kind of more or less. Um, of course, there's a lot more going into that, but yeah, we're through our um, two eyes, we can make sense of the 3D world around us, and so we can't do that in 2D. So we have to use these techniques that we see, or these things that we see in real life, and try to replicate those as best as we can. Again, VR and stereoscopic images, like those are exceptions, of course, but and those are quite unusual to see in relation to everyday images. Yeah, I talked about hatching last week. Charcoal. So charcoal is one of my favorite and least favorite ways to draw. The thing about charcoal is it's fun to shade things. It covers a lot of area at once. It's just kind of satisfying. You can blend things. You can it's easy to make values and change them. However, it's extremely messy. So, uh, yeah. So right here we have these sort of tools to create um, to create lines and shading and cover area. And then we use these things, these stumps, to blend those in together. So it's a really cool and fun and playful thing, as long as, again, you recognize that it's going to be really messy. Um, so yeah, here's an example of a charcoal drawing of, I don't have the year, but it was probably a century old by now. But you can see it's kind of looser than you would expect to see a graphite drawing, which I think is next. Um, Loose strokes, but you can see is done very quickly, and a lot of stuff was covered. A lot of ground was covered here, and it's more expressive and oh gosh, what's that word we used last week? Um, it's impressionistic and gestural. That's the word I was trying to use. Conti crayon. So this is, yeah, it is a crayon basically. It's charcoal, graphite, and wax. They usually come in different warm colors, mostly in the red to brown spectrum. So red, orange, I don't think I've seen it in any other colors other than that and black and white. I don't think I've seen them in cool colors. So yeah, they're easier to use than charcoal, obviously, but they're just like crayons, except a little bit more, I don't know, quote unquote professional. I don't like saying that, but it's basically um, holds better, I guess. You don't see them that much very often. I don't know why, but they're easy to work with. They're kind of fun. Um, but yeah, I guess regular crayons are just more accessible. Graphite, the thing we all know and love. Well, I don't know if you love it. But yeah, this is just crystalline carbon and clay. So uh, so as this picture demonstrates, there's a lot of different hardnesses that goes into drawing. If you haven't done any like real, I don't want to say real drawing. Sorry, that's elitist. If you haven't used these kinds of pencils, these drawing pencils, um, you'll see it goes from 4H to 6B here. There's other types, but it goes from like the thinnest to thick, depending on what you need to use. It goes from like brittle to chunky. It's kind of fun to play around with different types, but we use 2B for regular graphite pencils. Yeah, obviously it's erasable. Um, Yeah, this is a pretty impressive graphite drawing. I don't know what kind of pencils she used. Um, so like I would imagine this would take forever to shade in. I don't know if you just use standard drawing pencils or if you use specialized ones, but that's a lot of area to cover. Um, and yeah, because the points are so thin, that's why you only really see smaller drawings using graphite. Larger ones like this must take a really long time. I'd probably say a year or something. That would be my guess. But yeah, pretty intense stuff. Pastels. I'm sure everyone's here used pastels in elementary school. Yeah, pigments and binders, binders being the substance that holds the pigments together. So these are like slippery crayons, I guess. Um, which is kind of funny because Condy crayons are more precise. These are a little bit more looser. You can see with the paper here, there's a lot of gaps. That means like the the pastels are thicker. That means there's um it's not as precise. So as if you took a pencil to the substance, um, you would be able to easily fill in those gaps. Like there wouldn't be any gaps. But because this is like thicker and chunkier, um, there's a lot more texture that comes out in the paper. So that's something you'd want to consider. Um, this is an example of pastels done really well. I've done pastels several times, and to do something like this is exceptional, and I I can't imagine doing this with pastels. So um pretty cool stuff. Ink. Okay, so ink covers a broad range of things. So it's a pigment and the binder suspended in liquid. Many materials, obviously, brush or pen. Um, and yeah, sometimes you activate it with water, um, sometimes you don't need that. It depends on what you're doing. This could be very precise, such as this. I don't know how to pronounce her name, Nina Bunyevac. I'm guessing there's a lot of cross hatching here. The reason for that is because it's a either or black or white value. So for this to imitate shading, you'll use cross hatching. There's other things you can use like India ink with brushes, and this is you can see this is less precise. But yeah, and as everyone knows, you can get different kinds of pens. Some are a little bit more viscous, some are more watery. Um, it just depending on what you want. Uh, the sort of things you can do with ink is vast, and yeah, dependent on what you want. Um, Digital drawing. So this is something I picked up in the past couple years. So using a tablet as a canvas, you could use just the tablet and it's um, represented on the screen, but you don't draw directly on it. So obviously, this is a really cool way to do things with the ability to undo things is completely awesome. And that's the greatest thing, in my opinion, about digital drawing over other media is the undo button. Um, However, of course, there's so many tricks you can do digitally because it's not real. Um, that doesn't mean inferior. That just means it's not real, like paint, not real ink. But plenty of brushes that sort of imitate those types of things, but infinitely flexible, infinitely adaptable. You could print it on canvas with at print shops and such. But um, yeah, so here's a couple examples of digital drawing, just silly little sketches. Um, I don't know. I really like the one on the left. So I did a couple birthday cards. The top left one is for my mom this year, and the one on the right is a digital drawing birthday card for my brother, which was the 21st. Yeah, it's I'm an amateur, but it's just really fun being able to adjust like brightness. If you need to change the whole scene, you could do that really quickly. Um, there's just so much magic in it, adjusting things. Right now I'm making a actual like acrylic painting right now, and I'm like I carefully sketched everything out, but with this it's like, nah, I could take away that layer. So this is a great way to paint. However, I highly recommend actually getting your physical drawing skills in first, as well as physical painting skills in first, which is what we're talking about now. All right, so yeah, so drawing and painting are different, but there are obviously some forms of overlap. Okay, so obviously paints the difference. And drawing is thought of as it says here, very direct, 1-to-1 ratio of like you put this mark on the substrate, the canvas, whatever, it'll make that mark. Painting is more about covering the surface, building it up, spreading things around. It's about working with the pigment, working with the material. Um, of course, there's some overlap because using India ink, which is more watery sort of ink, you can consider that painting because you are spreading around the ink like that. Um, so again, just like everything in this class, there's never a 100% perfect um, definition of what one thing is and what one thing isn't. Okay, so equalities, viscosity, how thick or how watery things are, opacity, um, how translucent they are, the body, the thickness, the overall quality of that pigment, which is basically the color of it. Okay, so yeah, this left demonstrates the first drawing, the drawing that will become the painting. So on the left here, you can see that here it's outlined here, the figure is outlined. There is shading, but you can see like the individual strokes of the pencil, right? So again, pencils aren't meant to cover like a lot of ground necessarily. So this is like kind of the sketch to sort of, because like you can erase with pencil, right? The second step is to do an underpainting. This sort of builds up the layers of paint to sort of to make sure it's not doesn't have like this thinness, where it's just like some paint on there. It's like building up the thickness, building up the shadows, building up the surface, sometimes building up the texture too. And then here's more or less the final result. Of course, this is more gestural, as you can see. Yeah, it's an interesting process, and it takes a lot more effort than just drawing. Okay, I'm not going to show these videos, but it shows how to make oil paint. So we start off with the pigment, which again is the powder, culled from different materials. So in last lecture, I mentioned, or 2 lectures ago, I'm not sure which one, I mentioned that purple was associated with royalty. The reason for this is because purple pigments were harder to procure back in the days. So that's why there's that connection there. Sometimes like blues are also a little have the history of being a little bit more for rich people as well for the same reason. So yeah, pigments procured from different sources. Binder sticks this stuff together, so it creates like this kind of stuff. Um, and the solvent is basically once you have that, then you need to be able to not have like chunk of stuff. You need to have liquidity. You need to be able to spread it. So use solvent in order to make that happen. Okay. Um, and yeah, different paints, different oils do different things. Oh, come on. So yeah, pigments again, colored substances, and different binders again have different viscosities like linseed oil or sunflower oil. I've scarcely used oil paintings, but it's pretty interesting, and it has a lot of basically if you're really into customizing like your colors, customizing how your paint applies to the canvas, then oil will be for you. Yeah, it's on here. And there's also a thing called mediums. Um, I don't think it's called media plural. I think they're different mediums. So again, that's like those are ways to sort of to modify or customize how you want your painting to be. Some of them make the paints dry quicker, some of them make them dry slower, some of them add thickness to it. And again, it sort of changes the texture, viscosity, etc. of the paint. So one thing that's both a positive and negative about oil painting is that it takes a long time to dry. And depending on the paint, sometimes people say there's some paints that never truly dry. I don't know how true that is. But sometimes it may take years. I don't know if that's true, but that's what's been said to me a few times in art history classes. So the reason that would be a good thing is because it makes things easier to blend together. We'll talk about acrylics next, but also that means like you have to wait for it to dry for a long time in order for it to be like you can touch it, you know. And you're like, if you're thinking, why would you want to touch it? Well, when you finish in your studio, you'll probably want to hang it up. You might accidentally touch it on your clothes or places in the studio, or if you're transporting it to a different venue, then you know you have to worry about it touching other things. So it kind of sucks in that sense, but also you can use that as an advantage. Um, and yeah, you can just cover like a palette up with paint, with plastic, and it shouldn't dry, um, unless you do it improperly, like I have done before. There's a cool video about oil paint. We're not going to watch. Um, so yeah, painting's been thought about as a window to the world because it was done so realistically that, you know, it just looks impressive, and you think of it as, again, a window to another world. So this was definitely helped by the fact that people figured out how to do layers and layers using glazes, using different media to create a realistic look through, you know, value, shading, and different techniques that I'm never going to do because because this stuff is really, really difficult. Yeah, you're not going to be able to do a portrait like this in a couple years, let me tell you that. So acrylic painting, which is actually my favorite kind of painting. The reason for this is because it's easy, it's accessible, and everything dries quicker because I like to paint with layers and such. So yeah, it's acrylics, just basically a pigment with plastic, which sounds kind of funny, but it is a form of plastic. Um, yeah, it can't, like it says, it can look distinguishable from oil, but there's some paintings that you'll know, like, oh, this is acrylic because it's like done with harder edges. Usually, as we'll see in the next slide, I believe. But yeah, the drying time's a lot shorter, which again is an advantage and disadvantage. If you're going for subtlety, you don't want to use acrylic. If acrylic's really good for just like flat paint, um, flat fields of paint, as opposed to blending things in smoothly. You can do that, of course, but since the drying time is a lot quicker, significantly quicker, you'd have to work fast. And I don't work fast, so that's why I kind of don't do a lot of blending. And again, the mediums are used to prolong drying or add thickness to it or thin it out even. Yeah. So Bridget Riley, who does op art paintings, yeah, she used acrylic paintings for this. Again, this is more flat, a flat painting, as opposed to there's no blending going on in here. So it makes sense to use acrylic painting in that sense, right? Also, it tends to be cheaper and more consistent. because with oil paintings, you might add too much of a medium, too much of the, what's that word? Not binder, solvent and stuff. So, yeah, it's a lot more consistent, and all you need is the paint and some water, and that's kind of it. All right, watercolor, which again, everyone is probably familiar with. Pigments and gum arabic and water. I don't know what gum arabic is, to be honest. I think it comes from a tree, though. Um, so yeah, we're familiar with this. This obviously is a little bit looser than the acrylic and oil. This is again pretty easy and accessible to use, which is why we use that. We use this, and we don't really use oil paintings in elementary school, right? So the benefits of that is just cover a lot of space easily, create thin layers if you want that. If you don't want that, you can build them up easily, and that's again actually mostly a benefit. People will pick watercolor because they want to build up layers of color. It is hard to control because we are using a more liquid substance than something chunkier. Uh, and this last point, if you're good at it, you could probably sell ocean scenes kind of easily. People go nuts for that. This is an excerpt from one of my favorite graphic novels slash comic books, Architecture of an Atom. You see, it is pretty loose, but also you can be kind of precise with it. I'm sure the artists use like little bits of masking tape to make these perfect lines. But as you can see, pretty much everything else is pretty flowy. This is Emily Bronte, who wrote Wuthering Heights. She also was an artist, I guess, and this was her pet, more or less, which is kind of interesting. But I don't recommend befriending wild pets or wild birds. Encaustic. Okay, so this is something I haven't used, and I've never known anyone who used it personally, but that's because it's not easy to use, as it says here. But yeah, it's pigments and beeswax, and you use heat in order to liquefy it and make it bind to the canvas. It can last a long time, as you can see here. This is 100 CE, which is a couple years ago, I guess. But yeah, it's very permanent. It's permanent. And yeah, it's, as you can see, it's pretty beautiful. It's not as precise as you would see in oil paintings, but it does allow for blending, value, etc., etc. It can also be used like this, which is um I don't know, I think that's a really funny picture. um Fresco. Okay, so there's a couple types of fresco. One for I'm a quarter Italian, but I don't speak Italian. Buon fresco. Sorry, that sounds bad. So that's painting onto wet plaster, which means the pigment and the painting is embedded into the plaster, and it's only going to be destroyed when the wall is destroyed. Fresco secco is applied onto already dried plaster, so it's less permanent. So those are a couple ways to do that. This is one of the most famous examples of fresco and restoration. Um, Thank you, Cecilia Jimenez, for giving us this gift. Um, so you can see here that the painting, um, what we're looking at, the white spots, is the wall underneath the painting, and the reason it's there is because the wall was chipped away, so the painting was chipped away. And and this is how this person improved it. Tempera painting, again, I don't have experience with this, but this is egg-based pigments and egg tempera. Tempera, again, fast drying, substrate needs to be stiff to bind well and last a really long time. Again, this has a lot of hallmarks of oil painting, like blending, and acrylic painting too, different types of painting. But you can see you can make really beautiful things with this that last longer than a typical like acrylic painting, for example. But yeah, again, don't have personal experience with this. All right, next section, printmaking. So transferring pigments to a substrate using a matrix. So we know what pigments are. A substrate, again, is like the canvas. A matrix is basically, in the sense of printmaking, a matrix is the thing, basically the stamp that you use to make prints. And there's different ways to do this. So this was considered to be the first mass medium. There's a lot of interesting things that happen with society because of that. This isn't a history class. This isn't a history of art class. So it's impossible to go into the details um, that happen here. But basically, it was just like how AIs right now, or how when digital photography became a thing. When this came out, there was a whole hullabaloo about what is this going to do with the society. Now the everyday person can look at art or read these things or read the paper. That's going to change society, and it did. And human civilization did not collapse. So yeah, there's a lot to read into this. A lot of classicism happened. Um, Intellectualism and anti-intellectualism like sort of clashed. Um, it was a big deal. Okay, so again, like I mentioned in the first or second lecture, I can't remember. This is a mass medium in that there can be more than one copy. Each copy is like pretty much the same. There'll be slight differences between them. The further you make copies, possibly depending on how strong um, or solid your matrix is. But yeah, there's many ways to make prints. All right, so relief is the first type of printmaking. A relief is cutting into a material, the matrix. Uh, so yeah, so in this case, I believe this is linoleum, or I don't know if that's what are linoleum, but I learned with linoleum, um, and this is a subtractive process. So what that means is you take things away, and once you take things away, you can't bring them back, which is obvious, but also like you can create cool things based on the tools that you have. So with this tool, you'll be getting like a thicker cut, right? You can also use something like this was made with wood. We're looking at the print here, not the actual wood matrix. So Lynn Ward made these wordless novels. I have this book. It's beautiful, and I can't believe how many images this person made by carving in wood. Yeah, it's considered graphic novel. This is another example of an engraving. Okay, so back to this. So now we know what they look like. Basically, what you do is you cut away what you don't want to appear in the final image. So whatever is being cut away, we don't want that, right? So we'll be inking whatever is this substance to begin with. The what isn't cut, the little gaps right here, they're not going to be covered in ink. And the opposite is true for intaglio. So this is, you are scratching into the matrix again. However, the difference is the ink will fill the gaps. Okay, you can see this is more precise way of working. You're actually drawing the or you're carving the positive part instead of carving what you don't want. So this is a more direct way of doing things. So yeah, the way you basically do this is um, you put ink on it, kind of squeegee it, and then wipe the outside to get rid of the ink on the raised part. Again, yeah, this is usually done with metals and good with precision. Yeah, this is cute example, I guess, of using etching. I don't know specifically what she used here, but this is something I thought was really cool. Planographic, again, you're sort of etching as well. Um, you're, I think 99% of the time you'll be using limestone for this. And this is used mostly for commercial. As you can tell, this matrix right here, as opposed to something smaller like that or that is a bit more permanent. It'll last longer. It's more solid. It's heavier. Um, so things such as lithography, which you can do things like this. I've never done it, but it's basically you're using sort of these surfaces, you're washing with acid, um, and different liquids, oil and water. Um, I don't know exactly how it's done, but it's a very intensive process. But this is a sort of thing if you want to make um, like pretty much identical prints for a long time. Right. As you can tell, it's more probably going to be more expensive, more time consuming than the other ones. Stencil printing. So screen printing is this type of stencil printing. You're using stencil, which is, what you see here. There's holes for the ink to go through. So yeah, passing through a porous matrix with a blocking stencil. Um, so depending on what kind of stencil printing you do for screen printing, it does involve light, water, and ink at different stages. You could use you're using the way I did it is using printouts of things using acetate, which is basically clear paper, more or less. I don't know how to better describe it. And then you transfer that using a light based process. But this is a process used for t-shirts, for printing t-shirts. And make sure to this is a quiz question, so remember that this is used for t-shirts. We can also do non-t-shirt things, right? So this is using probably three different passes through. So there's probably a screen for this blue, probably a screen for this gray, and probably a screen for this orange, and the white was probably just left blank. So you can do multiple layers. So yeah, so if you see, um, yeah, so when you see t-shirts, if they're like one or two or three colors, just know that there's just three inks there, done in different types of different orders and such. Usually when they're fully colors with blended gradients and such, that's usually done through heat transfer. But if it's like, again, one or two or three colors, it's probably done through screen printing. Photography, yay. um rem- I have a degree in photography, and it's a very, very deep medium. Okay, so this is generally how mirrors work. Well, sorry, this is how cameras work, but I would say some cameras rather. So here's the viewfinder, and here's a mirror, screen, a mirror. Here's what you look through. The mirror flips up to expose the film. Um, so yeah, it's kind of interesting how cameras. Yeah, this is a film camera. Digital cameras where you can, when you click it and you can hear a noise and something inside moves. That's what this is. Basically a single lens reflex camera where what you see through the viewfinder is what's coming in through the lens. Whew, okay. Daguerreotype. So it was one of the basically the most popular, is the first popular medium to be used in photography by Louis Daguerre, who invented it. Uh, and this is a pretty cool photograph because the exposure time was like a few minutes, 15 minutes. Uh, so when you have a exposure that long, light is coming in for that amount of time. Okay, so when things are still, like here, like this building, they obviously don't move. They're gonna come in nice and crisp. Um, but if you notice when you take pictures at night and uh, without the flash and things are kind of blurry, that's because more light needs to come into the lens in order to really capture images. Otherwise, it'll just be black and you can't see anything. Right. So these earlier types of photography weren't just like instantaneous click a button. This you had to hold the lens open. And what's interesting about this image is what we have right here, where my pointer is circling, is probably the first known photographed person. The reason the reason this person shows up and no one else does, because this was supposedly a crowded street, is because this person probably was getting their um, foot or their shoe polished for 15 minutes or so. So that's the reason they showed up. There's probably people walking all around here and all around here, but they didn't show up because they're too quick to be captured by the camera. Again, it's 15 minutes exposure, so you wouldn't be captured unless you were in the image for a certain amount of time. Okay, uh so with this, taking portraits was a pain in the butt because humans have bodies that move no matter what. You know, your heart pumps and you breathe and you kind of get uncomfortable in chairs, so you like your head might move. Um so so it was very uncomfortable process, and this kind of shows what kind of stuff people did. um they're not literally screwed in real life, hopefully, at this time, but they put their heads against, you can't see them, but like they're sitting on chairs. There's probably a post behind there with a cushion to rest their heads upon to be extra still. Uses for photography. So this is an early use of photography that we can still do today, as the cyanotype. Basically, the way this works is you'll coat a paper with a special liquid. You'll have a either just put objects on top of the paper and then smush it with glass, or you can have acetate and draw on it. And whatever is white is whatever is being blocked by the objects. So Anna Atkins used cyanotypes in order to document these um, plants, right? Uh, so yeah, again, what she would do for this process is put these flowers or these leaves here and press on an already coated piece of paper, and then press down with glass, and then let the sun hit it for however many minutes. Okay. Um, chronophotography. So this is basically the precursor to film. This is a bet that Leland Stanford did about to are all legs of the horses are the legs of the horses when they run. Um, is is there at least one leg that's touching at all times, or does it sort of like, or do all the legs lift off the ground? So obviously we found out that like with these frames, like the legs are off the ground, so they're not legs not always touching. But it was basically um Leland Stanford making this bet, and Edward Muybridge is the one who constructed this basically like having a series of cameras lined up against a racetrack where the horse tripped a like string to make the camera go. So yeah, it was because of a bet that film kind of exists. I mean, probably would have happened anyways, but it's kind of cool that it involved a horse because horses are cool. I think I need to go a bit quicker. So documentary photography. Oh yeah, sorry, there's war images. So documentary photography was a thing. Um, Unfortunately, well, war exists. That's unfortunate to begin with, but um, since cameras were so slow, Thomas O'Sullivan had to take these pictures of when the action was already over, right? You can't just snap images, you have to set things up. So here's images of like the realities of war, because of course, um, things are sort of romanticized in drawings and statues, paintings, etc. But when you're shown like the quote unquote reality of things like this, it's kind of sobering to see what war actually is, right? Um, so yeah, like these sort of images were kind of shocking to people because like when you think of someone who died in battle, you think of them as a hero, and you want to like memorialize them, but seeing them just like dead on the ground like this, their humanity drained, it's it's kind of intense. This is my friend Stephen Arthur Miller. He documented people and things along the Ogeechee River in Crawfield, we'll just say Georgia. um yeah, art photography. So this is Henry Fox Talbot. He did a lot of quote unquote art photography, which is basically he set up compositions with photography, not to document things, not to record nature, um, not to be a journalist, but to make cool or beautiful pictures, right? So yeah, this isn't as precise as daguerreotype. There is sort of a negative. I'm not going to get too specifics, but um, using positives and negatives here, which not everyone might have ever used in this class. Ansel Adams is probably the most famous photographer, I would say. Um, he was basically known to be a perfectionist and wanted everything to be as beautiful as possible. And so he created the zone system, which is basically like, here's 9 steps of darkness, or value, I should say, to determine like what kind of looks best in the scene, more or less. Um, but so people think of him as a straight photographer, meaning that he captured things exactly as they were, which is kind of true, as opposed to sort of staging things. However, this example of the moonrise, the moon here, this was not there in the scene exactly as it was. I think he used 2 exposures to complete this, so it's not exactly straight photography. Um, but yeah, um, just want to make beautiful stuff, right? Wolfgang Tillmans is probably my favorite photographer, because he uses a lot of different sizes and formats and subjects, a lot of abstraction, a lot of real life stuff. He's also queer, which is obviously something I like. But yeah, he's my favorite art photographer for sure. Jerry Ullsman, who died last year around this time, he does surreal photography. I think before he died, he was playing with digital, but these were done with film, which if you ever use film photography in a darkroom, you would know how difficult this is. But um, yeah, this takes a lot of work and a lot of precision and a lot of trial and error. How photography influences painting. So I don't have time to really ask that question to all of you, but yeah, photography was great because it sort of shifted what painting needed to do. So in this sense, Degas painted was sort of influenced by photography. In this composition, it's more of an everyday moment. Not everything's like perfectly posed, right? So the composition's a little bit weird compared to what we would normally see. Um, and yeah, the sense of focus is different, which imitates human eyes sometimes, especially if you're short sighted or nearsighted. I forget which one is which. Um, but also, it allowed painting to be kind of free to just be painting. So again, I think I've talked about this before, but once photography was a thing, painting didn't need to be the most important way of documenting things perfectly. So, although like Hilda af Klimt did a lot of abstract paintings, like abstraction became much more of a thing after photography because again, we didn't need to put in that effort to make um, realistic paintings of things that existed. We could just capture them. So this sort of allowed painting to talk about itself, basically. Like abstraction's a thing because it's about painting. It's not about the real world. This is a painting. Everyone knows it's a painting. It's a painting about painting, more or less. It's a lot more complex than that, but that's the gist of it. Digital images. So obviously we're familiar with this, using pixels and sensors instead of cameras or instead of film. Sorry. Um, Digital photography is awesome in the same way that digital drawing and painting are. The undo button is one of the most amazing things in the world, and infinite amount of customizability. Uh, so I used to be a total film nerd, and I resisted digital until until the film labs I lost access to because I graduated, and then realized this is expensive. And once you get digital, it's kind of hard to go back unless you specifically want to go to the more tactile medium of film. So of course this allows quicker expression in ways that are not possible in film. I used to think like, yeah, you can do anything in film, but it's kind of pointless when you can do things a lot easier, more efficiently in digital, unless that's your point of making a belabored process. Um, Video art, yeah, we'll talk about it another time. But yeah, this is a cool video about it. Three-dimensional art. Oh my gosh, we have a lot to go. So relief is a form that's sticking out of its own material. So low relief or bas relief, BAS, that's pronounced ba. That's when it only sticks out a little bit. And high relief is when it's sticking out a lot, right? So yeah, there's medium relief as well, of course, but I would say like behind this person, like this is more medium relief. But yeah, this is low relief is not trying to imitate the spatial relationships that this um, koi fish and this lily pad would have in real life. They have the same amount of depth to them. So it's more of an image type thing, whereas high relief tends to be more realistic in terms of space and proportions and depth. Okay. So yeah, is this high or low relief? It's up to you. Uh, so modeling and and as I mentioned in drawing, um, modeling's a thing there too. So that might be a quiz question. It might not. So modeling is something you do in sculpture where you create forms. You're adding to a form to another form. We'll talk about subtractive in a bit. So yeah, so I guess it's both, but as you can see here, here's the armature, which are the fingers that are that don't have clay on them. Those are basically the skeletons of of a sculpture. That sort of keeps the clay on. It also creates a sort of it keeps things stable, and it's easier to mold around that instead of just like building on top of things. Um, so ceramics, everyone's familiar with plates and bowls, hopefully. But yeah, ceramics is basically molding clay to be whatever you want it to be. Here you can see bubble wrap, and now it's ceramics, which is kind of cool. Carving is a subtractive process, on the other hand, where you take it away. So yeah, so this is Todd Fram, who's basically he made this limestone block. It was a huge rectangular prism, and he's carving it to make this hand. So you take away, and Michelangelo's David is the same way. He said something about like, I see the form inside of it, and I'm just freeing the form from the block of marble or whatever. So I saw this happen in real life. As you can see, he has a mask on before masks were cool in 2020, and and also earmuffs that also had radio in it. This is wood carving, obviously carving from wood. A subtractive process. Again, there is more wood, and then Jessica Drink cut wood away to make these forms. Casting. So casting's an interesting one. This is a way to sort of make, there's different uses for it, but yeah, this is to make one material from another. So what you do is basically all casting uses molds. Basically you fill this mold with the substance. And yeah, there's different types of processes. So unfortunately I can't show the video because it's 4 minutes and I don't want to go too much over time. But yeah, this is one of the reasons you'd use a mold is to make negatives. And this is a kind of a process in a video or in a picture form to how to do it. Here's this original thing. For example, if this is made of gold, you'll make plaster molds around it so it takes the exact form. And then you use another substance like wax, and then you do some other things to it, which the video will explain, and then you get something new out of it. All right. Yeah, this video is awesome. Uh, it's peaceful, it's ambient, it's awesome. And here's the process of doing it. So why not just like, so this is a process making like a bronze sculpture like this, right? So why not like just create something out of bronze, like, and just carve it? I've never carved bronze before, but it's probably really intense and probably not easy to work with. So one of the things of doing this using a lost wax casting process is basically wax is more malleable. It's easier to carve and modify. So basically you're using that, and then you don't want to carve directly in bronze because it's difficult, but with wax it's easier to carve into, or plaster or whatever. And plaster is used as a cast as well. But yeah, it'll make a lot more sense with this video for sure. Yeah, it's for ease of use or for making multiples. You can often make, not always, but you can often make multiple of the same exact copy with a cast, as long as the cast doesn't break. So yeah. So this is a guy who cast his own head made of his own blood. Probably should have given a warning there. So think about it, like there's no way he could have really just like carved blood, because he had to, it's frozen, obviously. He couldn't just like really have a block of blood and carve it, right? So the way he did it is probably taking a cast of himself, and then filling that cast, oh gosh, a mold of it, um, a plaster cast mold of it, filled it with a substance, and create another mold of it, um, and then filled the bloods with that. So yeah, it's kind of intense process, but it's also more of a thing where it's less about skill. Well, it does take a lot of skill and more about knowledge on how to do these things, rather than knowing how to like carve out little details. But you probably will need to know how to do that anyway. So never mind. As you can see, you could see the creases in the skin. So there's a lot of detail that goes into it. And yeah, if you want to make it a little bit more perfect, you could like carve and modify it like so yeah. Assembly or assemblage is attaching objects together. Usually it's an additive process and it's using found objects most of the time, not all the times. Found objects meaning things that already exist in the world that the artist didn't create necessarily. So like the artist didn't necessarily create this part or this part or this part. They could have found it at a junkyard. Now they're welding it together to make their own thing. So Sarah Z makes these really incredible, intricate sculptures, installations, whatever, using again things that already exist. Um, Kinetic art. So this is art that moves. This is a wind-powered thing called the Strandabeest by Theo Jansen. You can the wind moves this, for example. This is a Connect sculpture I made in undergrad, where it's basically all wood. Um, I gotta see in the class. I wasn't very good at it, but it's basically yeah. So the thing about kinetic sculpture is it looks really cool, right? You get a moving sculpture. Um, so not only is it hard to make, but it's even harder to keep from breaking. So I'd only recommend it if you're really dedicated to getting these things done. And this is a video about how failed of the sculpture I did. As you can see, I'm struggling to make it work well. I thought it'd be funny to just do it like that. Okay. Okay, that's out of order. Assemblage. Um, yeah, I don't know why that's separate from the previous ones, but yeah, using found objects. Installation. So installations usually site specific. It's usually incorporates the environment directly. Um, this is an example of installation by Megan Geckler. So this artwork only exists in this space. So once the show's over, she just like cuts these this tape down and it doesn't exist anymore. Right. So insulation is again tends to be things that only exist in a specific space. However, there are exceptions. There are installations where people move it from gallery to gallery. It won't be 100% exactly the same, but the spirit is still there. So that's why I say most installation art only exists only once, but people can repeat their work. Um, so Andy Goldsworthy is someone everyone goes nuts over, including myself. He creates installation works um, out of the land, out of nature. He only uses natural materials, which is really nice, and they're ephemeral, meaning they only exist for a short amount of time. He documents them with the camera, and then that's all that exists from them now. So this is also a form of land art. Land art meaning just creating art from the land. Usually when people think of land art, they think of, I wonder if I have Spiral Jetty here. No, I don't. When people think of land art, they think of Spiral Jetty or basically like huge things associated with the land. Actually, let me look up Spiral Jetty for you. Um, yeah, so land art is basically like, obviously this isn't natural, but the artist created this huge forms of art, basically site specific, right? Um, but yeah, Andy Goldsworthy does them on a smaller scale. They're ephemeral. They don't last long. And it's really cool because nature is very chaotic and organic, and it creates an order to them. Uh, so yeah, he uses like color, space, um, juxtaposition, line, form, all sorts of things to bring something unnatural to nature. This is a trailer for a video or for a movie called Working with Time. Uh, actually, Rivers and Tides. Really, really, really great documentary. I highly recommend watching it. You can see the kind of stuff he goes through to make these forms. I I would never do it. Must be frustrating, but the results speaks for themselves. A virtual space to object. So this is just a way to get something from the computer out to the real world. So this is one example. This is another example that I of an artist I just discovered recently, Tom Lohrmann. These are actually his students' work, but yeah, this is clay. It's ceramics, and yeah, this students use these two students. They're two different people doing these. Use this machine to create ceramics out of digital files, which is really neat. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing screen. So that's all I really have time for. Um, as you can probably guess, there's not unlimited, but there's much more types of media and material out there that are possible to use. It's impossible to cover it all, but that's a broad stroke of what's out there and what's kind of known and taught in art history classes and what's kind of common and what's accessible. Some of them aren't, but um, yeah, different media. So yeah, thanks for showing up. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye bye.